Director Borcherding, did you have another question?
I do. So just to be clear on that implementation timeline, this isn't happening until next fall. These recommendations, are these the recommendations being enacted now?
These would be recommendations for immediately.
Yes.
So what would happen is the contract would come back to you as a board at the next meeting based on you and having the ability to have conversations, provide feedback, and then us working collaboratively with CRPD on an amendment or changes to that contract.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. You know, I'm seeing a lot of goals and I'm seeing a lot of like collaborative effort being put around shared work, and that is fantastic. I am still unclear on what problem this program is designed to address.
You said the,
What problem is the SRO program designed to address? I'm still unclear on what the problem is.
So I
see
think
goals and
initially,
actions.
and this probably isn't going to be a good answer, but initially schools started this because of the safety of the Columbine shooting. So SROs became added to schools. I know we did not do that until 2010. At that point in time, it was an administrator that felt passionately about trying SROs in the system. We talk about relationships, and I know we have fabulous SROs forming relationships. I will never say that's not the case. I'm really standing here hoping all of us that work within the school system establish fabulous relationships with our students. So I know that's one of the things. We've also talked about the community policing aspect. So if they can work in the system, outside of the system, become safer has been an aspect that they have taught me as we've had many conversations. But ultimately, lots of questions were raised tonight. Could money be better spent on therapists and on other people within our system? And we do have ESSER dollars now, so we are doing all of those things. So I don't want people to think we don't have mental health supports for our children, because we do. That doesn't mean we can't look to shift and have more supports, more nurses, more counselors, more teachers. Everybody could argue a point for more of something, more paras, whatever it is.
So kind of based on that, I guess a follow-up question being we're trying to wrap around and provide supports for safety, for social emotional learning, for adverse childhood experiences, for trauma-informed instruction. I guess my question is, if this program never existed, in 2021, would we be implementing it in this manner? No. To address this problem?
I would say no, we would not.
But I have a question. So these are recommendations. Are the SROs in the middle schools still reporting to the middle schools?
So in partnership with CRPD, we discussed this just last week as the recommendations, and we determined them not being there a day happens, or 2 days or a week, where they could be at a training, right, or be somewhere else. But to put them in a building connected to kids and adults, that again, as you can hear, there's emotion. People love their SROs, would create trauma not only for the SRO, but for our students, for our staff members there. So we put a hold on having them report this week. They were in buildings last week because, again, we didn't want any more trauma from the situation until decisions were made. It will be very easy to put them into a school to provide the support, but it would be very hard, of course, to have them make those connections again and say, oh, sorry, tomorrow you don't report, and now you've connected all the kids on the first day.
It was truly the timing of our board meeting to be able to have this
Ideal.
discussion. And
Is taking them out of the middle schools a matter of we can't put them in all of our middle schools, so we're not going to put them into, and I understand the metrics there, but you know, kind of to what Director Borcherding said, you know, would we be implementing this way if we had unlimited budget and we could do what we want? Would we put six SROs in 6 middle schools?
So we didn't make the recommendation based on budget constraints, because again, we have the opportunity this year that we've never had to have ESSER dollars and so forth. We made the recommendation based on frontal lobe development of middle school students, the fact that our data, we believe, and we didn't dig into that till we started discussing not the 2 that they're currently in, to really dig in to see, wow, do we need SROs in our buildings? Not that, again, they don't form relationships and provide any value. But are there other services and supports that we're working towards in the restorative fashion that we can continue to focus on? So it wasn't about what they don't do or we need more. It was just about really digging into that data and going, wow, this is an epiphany of our data's really pretty good.
One of the questions that surfaced early on in the conversations when we were analyzing this in this late spring, early summer was, do we spread the two resources around all 6 schools? The concern was presented early tonight was, what would the focus be? How would that shift the focus? And would they be able to establish the relationships within the buildings? So even as of last week, we're still having this conversation to say, well, perhaps it's proactive measures of the educational components of what does it mean to be a citizen, cyberbullying, as you were saying, other ways in which our SROs might be able to deliver instruction and be a resource across all the middle schools instead of just 2. So we did have those discussions as well.
And I think what's important too is whatever we decide, because we are not voting tonight, that we need to make sure if we keep them or if we don't, we got to look back at our students. What's going to be best? What support will be put in place for our children to feel safe so they thrive within the district. So we don't want to turn around and pull everything and we don't have a plan in place, and that delays it even longer. So that's something that we need to be thinking about too as a board.
On recommendation 3, where the district is recommending that we divert whenever possible, who makes what's the definition of whenever possible, and who makes that decision? And related to that, and I know that, this is an estimate, if 40 of our 600 and some this year were diverted with this new recommendation, how would that 40 have been affected? Would it go to 60? Would it go to 400? I'm just curious.
So currently about 50% of our arrests come from that disorderly conduct over the course of not just this past year, over the course of the 4-year period that we measured the results. So we're really looking to, and when we say, we had a lot of conversations about disorderly conduct. Sometimes if it's a third offense, it's not like there will never be an arrest, but we want to make sure in a system and working in collaboration with CRPD, we do school consequences, we do supports, we offer the opportunity for diversion for our students before we ever get to that. Now they also pointed out sometimes students don't want diversion, right? Sometimes they move to that arrest. But at least we'd have an opportunity to do some proactive measures with students before we got to that point. In talking about what that looks like in guidelines, I have a draft sheet I can share with the board. It's completely a draft. We talked about it at the administrative meeting. We want to talk, I got this from another local school district that is not currently using SROs as a guideline for what they do for decision making. And having conversations with our administrators, they still make those really hard decisions on a regular basis, right? They don't look to somebody else to make them for them. They make them. Now they can make them collaboratively with the SRO, but they're still determining, do I involve the SRO on this or do I not? Do I say to the SRO, I think we need to move with charges? Do I keep it at a school discipline measure? So really working to identify, because we're going to be meeting with those principals on a regular basis, what does this matrix look like? And then if we are going to look at making an arrest, there's a conversation not only with the SRO and the admin, but the executive level director that can maybe be outside the box. We know there's a motion that gets put into play whenever we're dealing with any situations, especially a student that maybe did something wrong in a building. So that executive building level director can then have that conversation, ask some of those questions, give them a pause point of, is this best for the student to make their arrest? Is there other avenues we should take, and really help guide the principal and SRO and just help them be a think partner through that problem solving?
Okay, so it would be a collaborative conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, and again, not that all 50% of those that you just identified would qualify, but it would be closer to that number than the less than 10% we have now. Okay, thank you.
Correct. And we have some of our processes and procedures in place right now that were meant to be equitable, that were created with the lens of providing equity. But when you give them to an administrator who's an extreme rule follower, sometimes the intent doesn't meet the goal, right? So sometimes we're like, oh, look at what I have to do in this paper. The district is telling me I have to contact law enforcement. This is illegal, and have them do something about, sorry about my analogy of the dime bag of marijuana in my pocket. Again, not that that's right. And I don't really have one, but just making sure people know that.
Have another question?
Yes, I do. With the exception of the possibility that we would remove the SROs from middle schools, it appears that all of our recommendations assume that we are retaining the SROs in our high schools. So my question is that an issue that we will revisit regularly? Is any decision we make now good for 1 year and then we revisit? I guess what I'm wondering is, what's the end goal here? Is this a step towards a goal, or are we, here's what we're going to try now, we'll collect our data and see what we do next?
This is definitely a step towards the goal, right? And giving us an opportunity to do some things differently and really see what it looks like. Like even uniforms, people probably think I initially thought, how hard can that be? But I'm also not a part of the Cedar Rapids Police Department, right? So we had a lot of conversations. So the bike patrol with the khaki pants and the navy polo with all of still of their equipment, what does that look like? So really talking through and trying to get on the same page of mindset of what our goals are that we shared in the presentation. These are definitely step one, and we need to continue to analyze data internally. And when I say internally, our discipline data and our arrest data and all the pieces of what we're utilizing SROs for to do better for all of our students.
Were you done, Director? But I also want us to remember, this topic came to us based on high school students from the BSU that had a concern about the SROs in the high schools. I think we have to step back too and look at that. I know we're saying not the middle school, but this originated from students coming forward that were high school students and how they were feeling with the SROs in the school. So I don't want that to get lost in our discussion either.
I wanted to ask a real quick question following up on what Director Garlock said. In your conversations with Iowa City and Des Moines, they don't have SROs, never had them, and recently removed them. Was any thought given to recommending removing SROs entirely in our district? Was there any discussions about making that a recommendation?
Absolutely. I'll be honest, with that said, we've been collaboratively partnering, and that's never been a conversation that we've talked to CRPD as a partner with us on at this point. We haven't really given them an opportunity also to do things differently and given them direction of what we need. So this provides us that time in our high schools, in addition in Polk, to really make this look different and partner and work together. Currently, again, we're acknowledging the data doesn't look good, right? But we're also acknowledging the data doesn't look good because of us internally and how we're operating. And this is, hey, let's walk down this road together, let's partner together and really make something fabulous for students. And if we can't make something fabulous, then we need to look at doing something different and using resources differently. But right now, we haven't truly given that the full opportunity that we need to.
Following up on that, is there anything the board can do to make that move faster? Because as Superintendent Bush pointed out today, it was the first day of school today. And, if we assume that our survey data carries forward to our students that are in school today and moving forward, we likely have students who feel unsafe with SROs in the buildings. And so what are we doing for them in that interim period? Is that something we just have to accept because we're making the changes and we're trying to make the changes over time?
So it's a lot of communication. I think that what our students, just based on the feedback from the surveys, they don't always know what the intended purpose is of the relationship. So it's a lot of proactive education, making sure that our students are aware of purpose and intent, and it will be visible changes. For example, soft uniforms. So kids actually being able to observe that. But it will have to be ongoing and constant communication and supporting all of our students. So I appreciate what Deputy Superintendent has said, is that we haven't made a concerted enough effort to intentionally make changes. So we've got to get better at getting better. So this is the first step. To your question, Director Garlock, this is the first step. And then we have to constantly assess, is what we're doing making a difference?
Another piece of learning from Des Moines, they removed them all at once, and their advice to us, and again, not with the goal of doing better, as Superintendent Bush said, but just acknowledging, they said, if we would have had more time to establish systems within our buildings without pulling them out, like all of a sudden they're here and then they're gone, we could have been more successful. They have made it work, but again, we have, high school principals that are used to relying and partnering with their SRO, and our SROs, I'm going to say this again, do a fabulous job forming relationships with our staff and our students that they work with. So I think it's what could it look like eventually if we don't have them, and just really giving that opportunity to partner and see what can be better for us.
Well, and I think what's important, like, what do we put in place? We have to decide what we're going to do, but there has to be something in place, and that is my concern. Is can't turn around and say we're going to change this, and then, but we got to figure out how we're going to change it. We have to have everything in place, so we keep moving forward as a district. Any other?
I do have a couple of additional questions, and one is just based on what you were saying, President Humbles, about, needing to have a system in place. I'm wondering, I think it would be helpful to have a collaborative discussion with other support services to see what kind of time they need to be able to fill capacity for any kind of roles that we may be replacing. I don't think it does a service to our community partners to suddenly ask for 4 or 6 additional personnel without them having some time to be able to develop that staff. The other thing is a question kind of at a systems level. I hear a lot of talk, and I think I'm hearing common language and shared practice, which makes me excited that that's going to be used for the process in all of our schools and our data collection. I just want to make sure that the escalation process is consistent within that shared practice from school to school to school, so that when data is arriving at the board table, we're seeing clean and reliable data. So we're really comparing apples and apples and not apples and oranges. I'm also wondering how a data collection point would intersect with how the police department would be collecting data. Are they going to be collecting data similarly or in a different way, and then we're going to incorporate their data into the overall, or what's the plan there?
So great questions. With the data, they have the arrest data and so forth, and are going to submit the report that we're going to work on the details to. In addition, and on top of, we're working with Infinite Campus and our statisticians in the district on how, as administrators, we can track arrests, charges, contacts to parent from CRPD, so we can run reports and cross-reference that data and information to make sure we have everything accurate. Because again, sometimes it's challenging when you have a large system, but to make sure that everybody is doing the same process and procedure. And then we can have those conversations as a larger group on a quarterly basis and on a monthly basis as the SRO, building principal, executive director, and myself.
Thank you.
For the board members, I want to thank you. Was everyone finished with their questions? Because I don't want to cut anyone off. For your suggestions and your feedback to Superintendent Bush and Deputy Superintendent KOOIKER, and for those of you too that spoke, I appreciate that. And we look forward to further discussion around this topic. So the discussion it did not end here today. It will be ongoing. So with no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.